Hi again everyone, and today we are going to work through an Adobe Captivate project where we are incorporating flip cards. We appreciate that there's been quite a few tutorials and videos already on how to create flip cards. They are all really cool. We're certainly not discounting those examples, and we do encourage you to search those out and get other ideas. What we wanted to do here was present our take on flip cards. We had a client recently who wanted to incorporate flip cards into their project. They had a very special request whereby they wanted their users to be able to work through all of the flip cards before they were able to progress. So we're going to add some extra functionality to this process. The example that we've got here are some flip cards. Obviously, these flip cards are able to be flipped using the keyboard. So we've got numbers in there as well to be able to execute those flip cards using the keyboard. And also you'll notice there is a yellow star down the bottom, which at the moment, if we try and click on it or hit the letter S, which is what the shortcut key is, we can't actually click on that button because that button will allow the user to progress to the next slide. The button or the star button will become available once all the flip cards have been flipped, and the flip cards in our example can be flipped in any order. So for example, if I hit the letter 2 on the keyboard, that'll flick or flip over number 2. I can hit the number 3, or I can click on the number 1, or I can click on the number 4. As soon as I've clicked on all 4 flip cards, you'll now notice that the star has become available. We've also got an option here where we can include a link in a card if we wanted users to either navigate to another area of the project, or we wanted to navigate them to an external resource. And of course, now I can click on the star or hit the letter S to take us to the next slide. So let's see how we create this particular example. As I said, this is just our take on how to create flip cards. There are lots of other tutorials and videos out there. We do encourage you to watch those to get other ideas, but we're going to go ahead and create our example. So we're just going to create a brand new project here, a blank project. Now the way that we do it, it is a little bit different to other examples that you might see out there. Essentially what we do is we create the shapes of the flip cards. Also, here's a shape of our flip card. But what we do, or what we've done in our example, is we've created 2 shapes per card. So in actual fact, we've got a shape here, and what I'll do is I'm going to start renaming my shapes straight away. So I'm going to call this one front 1, because this is the front of card number 1. I'm going to duplicate this shape and I'm going to just pop it over here. So Control D to duplicate, or of course you can right mouse click on the shape and choose duplicate there. I'm going to call this one front 2, and I've always put a leading 0 in there just to help with ordering of shape names or ordering of object names when we need to choose them from a drop down menu. Putting a leading 0 in will ensure that all of those shapes or objects are in a proper order. So we've got front 1, front 2. I'm going to Control D to duplicate that again. I'm going to pop that down the bottom here. Front 3, 0, 3, and then Control D to create front 4. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate each of these shapes again, and these shapes will become the back. So I'm going to change this one to back 1 and duplicate again. Of course, there are lots of quicker ways to do this, but back 2, Control duplicate, back 3, and then of course duplicate again, and back 4. Now there will be a certain order that these shapes will need to appear in the timeline, so we will adjust that in a moment. Well, may as well adjust that now. So I'm going to take back 1 in the timeline. I'm just going to drag that down below front 1, back 2, drag that below front 2, back 3, below front 3, and then of course back 4 below front 4. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm just going to show you how to incorporate some imagery. Now what we've done in this other example is we did incorporate an image that has a hand icon on it. That of course allows users to see straight away that that is interactive and they need to click on it in order to activate the flip card. So really all we did here was change the fill of the object to be an image fill. If we do incorporate images as part of the states, what we found is as we were going through the different effects that we were using, the actual images in the state views weren't actually having the effects applied to them. So by putting any imagery in as part of a fill image allows that effect to show whether the card is flipping, or in our case it's going to squash and then expand again, which we'll get to in a moment. So all we did here was change the fill of the shape to become an image fill, and then we just looked for our custom image. Now we created this image actually just in PowerPoint, which was an image and then the hand icon on top of the image in PowerPoint, and then we selected both of those images and then saved the collection of those images as a single image. And you can check out our other video to see how to create images out of PowerPoint. But all we do here is we just click on OK. The last thing that we really need to do in adjusting this fill of the image is to change the way the image is positioned. So when we click on the fill button for the fill of that image, we change the tile type to bottom right, and you'll see that because the hand icon was in the bottom right of that image, then that now appears like so. And of course we can do the same for our other images or our other shapes as well. So we've got all of the images in our cards, and then the next thing we need to do is to put some content in the back of the cards. This is pretty straightforward. We can move the shapes around for the moment because we haven't really laid them out properly. Okay, so we've got our card content in there for each of the 4 cards. The next thing we need to do is we need to apply effects to each of the shapes. So when a user clicks on the card, an effect is executed to make it look like the card is actually flipping over. Now we need to be mindful of the fact that we've got 2 shapes per card, and there are reasons why we've done that, which we'll explain as we progress further through. And in order for this to work, we're actually going to execute the effect or trigger the effect when the user clicks on the front of each of the card. And because we're going to have several actions taking place, we do need to create an advanced action to execute when the user actually clicks on the card. Now the way that we're actually going to do this is, of course, I've just gone into the project menu and advanced actions, and advanced actions allow us to do many things. Most notably allows us to execute multiple actions at the same time, and this is basically what's going to be happening here. We need to think about how the cards are going to look like they're starting to flip over. So we need to animate both the shapes associated with the card, so the front and the back. We need to animate them the same. We're going to go down a slightly different path that you may have seen in other videos. And the reason for this is because we have a little bit more control over which way the cards actually flip. Now, some ways that we can do it is quite easy to show that the cards actually flip over vertically like that. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to flip the cards so they flipped actually horizontally. And we can do that by applying different effects that you may have seen in the past. So I'm going to create an action here which is going to handle the animation effect for card number 1. So I'm going to call this action flip 01. And the first action that I want to do is I want to apply an effect to the front of the card for card 1. When I double click on the first row to bring up the first action, the action that I'm looking for is apply effect. And a quick way to find the actions, because they're not actually in alphabetical order, is I can hit the first letter on the keyboard, which is A for apply, hit the letter A couple of times, and that'll take me to the action called apply effect. And I want to apply the effect first of all to the front of the card. So I'm going to choose front 1, and you'll see now why naming your shapes is beneficial, because we now have direct reference to which shape we are in fact working with. So I'm going to select front one. And the effect that we're actually looking for here is we're looking for a scale 2 effect. And this is actually found under the basic submenu for effects. So if we go into scale 2, and the reason why we are selecting this effect, because it gives us the control over which way the card actually looks like it's flipping, and we wanted to do it horizontal. So we click on the 3 little dots, and essentially what we're doing here is we want to scale the x-axis, which is the one going across. We want to scale that down to 0. So we're going to select scale x 0 here, and we want the y-axis to stay at the same shape or the same size. So the way we do that is we just put in scale y 1. Now if we click on OK, just going back into those 3 dots, and you'll see that those parameters have been set. We're essentially saying the effect start is going to happen straight away at the 0-second mark as soon as the front of the card is clicked, and the duration of that effect is 1 second. So over the course of 1 second, the shape is going to scale to x0 and scale y at 1, which is essentially just going to stay as normal as it is. So if we click on OK, the thing is we need to actually apply the effect to the back of the card as well. A quick way to do this is I can make sure that first row is selected. So I click on the first row. I've got a copy button just to the right of that actions table. So I click on copy, I click on the next row underneath, and then I click on the paste button. And then all I need to do here is change the shape that I want to impact, which in this case is back 1, which is the back of the card. And then if I go into the 3 dots, you'll see that those parameters are exactly the same. So if I click on OK and then save as action, and now what I need to do is I need to apply that effect to the front of the card. So I'm going to select front 1, and I'm going to go into the properties panel. I need to make sure use as button is selected. So I tick on the checkbox next to use as button. I click on actions, and then on success, I want to ensure that I'm executing an advanced action, and I want to execute the script that I just created called flip 1. If we now go into preview mode, because I like to test as I'm doing these things just to make sure everything is working as expected so far. So I click HTML5 in browser, and let's have a look and see what happens when we click on the front of the card. I'm going to get rid of that rollover shortly, but if I click, and you'll now notice that both of those shapes are actually collapsing, but they're actually collapsing across the wrong axes, which is fine, because all we need to do now is we just go back into our script, and I can access that quite quickly by going over to my actions panel underneath properties, finding the script, clicking on the yellow folder, and then all I need to do is change the parameters around each of the axes. So I'll just go into scale X, change that to 1, scale Y, change that to 0. I always get those axes mixed up, and I'm going to do the same for the second one, or the back of the card as well. So change scale X to 1 and scale Y to 0, and click on OK, and then update the action. And then of course what I can do is if I preview this again just to see what impact this has had, and when I click on the front of the card, you'll now notice that they're scaling a different way. So it now looks like they're starting to flip over horizontally. Now, of course, the trick here is that we need the back of the card to go back again. This is where it can start getting a little bit tricky and a little bit confusing, because essentially what happens here is if we were to go back into our script and if we were to apply the scale 2 effect, what that does is it takes the previous scale values, which in this case is 1 and 0, and it scales based on those last values. We're going to actually apply a completely different effect, which allows us to control the starting scale or the starting parameters instead of relying on the values that the previous effect actually left us with. So we're going to go in and apply an effect again. By the way, this isn't going to work, but I'm going to fall into a bit of a trap here, and I'm going to show you how we can fix this trap. But I like to fall into traps because then because these are common traps, and then I like to show you how to get out of them. So I'm going to hit the letter A again a couple of times. Now I want to leave the front of the card squashed, so I'm not going to scale, or I'm not going to change or apply an effect to the front of the card because that served its purpose, but I want the back of the card to grow back again. And we found we found a particular effect that works quite well here, not saying that it's the best or the worst. Essentially what we're looking for here is we're looking for one that says Asymmetric Zoom, and this is actually found under the entrance effects. So I'm going to go into entrance and then asymmetric zoom in. Now what this allows us to do, you'll see here we've got a few extra parameters here where we can control the starting point. So what we want to basically say here is that initial zoom X is 1 because that's what we had the initial, that's where we scaled it to before. The initial zoom Y is going to be 0. So we're setting the starting points here regardless of what the previous effect was. And then we want the finals, and these are actually 100, I should say, because they're 100% as opposed to a value. So initial zoom X is, and I always get these axes mixed up, so I'm just going to actually do zoom X 100 and zoom Y. I always get these mixed up. Anyway, we'll see what happens. And then we want the final resting place or the final zoom to be 100% for both. Now I think this is going to be wrong, but that's fine. As I said, I always get my X and Y axes mixed up, which is why I like to test as I go. And as I also said, we need to change this because there's going to be something that happens, which you'll notice happens, and I'll show you anyway when we get there. So I'm going to go back into preview HTML5 in browser. Now the problem is that all of these effects are actually going to be happening at the same time. So as soon as I click the button, you'll now notice that the back of the card actually grew straight away. So it did actually start from the 0 along the horizontal axis, which is what we wanted it to do, but it did it straight away. There wasn't time to allow for both of those cards to actually, or both of those shapes to do the first animation. There wasn't enough time to allow those animations to play out before the second animation for the back of the card to grow again. So here's a little bit of a trick here. We're going to go back into our script, and what we need to do here is we need to create a bit of a delay to allow those first two effects to play out, and the delay is going to be equal to the duration of those effects. So if we go into the first scale to effect, you'll see that there's an effect duration of 1 second. Fortunately, we have an action which allows us to delay when the next action will take place. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to actually put the delay in the last row. So I'm going to double click here, hit the letter D for delay, or a few times, delay next action by, and I'm just going to put in literal 1 second. And what I'm going to do is just reorder this action, and using the black arrow keys up in the top right hand corner, there's a move up arrow key. So if I click on that, that'll just change the order. So essentially what we're doing here is when the user clicks on the shape, the first two effects happen immediately. We then allow a second for those effects to play out. And then by delaying the last effect by 1 second, we then allow that last effect to play out once that second has passed. And that second is, of course, the buffer to allow those first two effects to play out. So let's click on Update Action here. And script successful, click on OK, close this. And what I will do is I'm just going to place these two shapes pretty much on top of each other. Of course, there are better ways of doing this. But now that they're on top of each other, if I preview HTML5 in browser again to test this out, and when I click on the card, both the shapes are actually squashing, but then the back shape will grow back up again to make it look like it's flipping over. Now we're back again, and what we can essentially do here is quite quickly we can create the same advanced actions for our other shapes. So if we go into the project menu and then advanced actions, and I'm going to go and select flip 1 for the advanced action. And what I can do here is that I can actually duplicate the action. Now there are other examples where we could save this as a shared action. We tend to approach shared actions with caution because they're a little bit limited as far as being able to edit them and make changes, add extra functionality as and when required. So we do tend to stick with the advanced action approach quite a bit. So we're going to stick with that approach in this particular example. But if you did want to save this as a shared action, then you could. But we are going to actually apply some other functionality shortly in order to allow the star or the secret button to appear once all of the cards have been flipped. But let's have a look at this. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the action, clicking on the duplicate button in the very top right hand corner of the advanced actions window. I've now got a duplicate of flip 1 and I'm going to change this to flip 2. And then all I need to do is I need to go in and change the actual shapes which are being impacted here. So for card 2, I want to go into the first row and I'm going to say instead of front 1, I'm going to change that to front 2. Instead of back 1, I'm going to change that to back 2, and then going back to grow the back of the card again. Last but not least, I'm going to change the last row from back 1 to back 2. Now, if I update this action and click on OK, I now have two actions in here, which are essentially the same. I'm going to close these down. I'm going to go into card 2, which is the card in the top right hand corner here. I'm going to use as button, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute an advanced action under the actions panel, and this time making sure my script says flip 2, and of course I do want to put a hand cursor and disable click sound there. And just before I test this out, I'm just going to move a few things out of the way. I'm going to grab both of these shapes by putting a lasso around them so they're both selected, and then using my alignment toolbar up in the top right hand or top left hand corner I should say. If you can't see the align window, we go into the window menu and select align from the drop down menu and make sure there is a tick next to align. You'll have this other toolbar appearing here, and essentially I just want to align center and then align middle, and that will place both of those shapes essentially on top of each other. And now if I preview HTML5 in browser, and I can now click on card 2, and card 2 will flip, and of course card 1 will flip as well. What I'm going to do now is apply the same approach to card 3 and card 4. Once again, all I need to do is go into the project menu, advanced actions, select a previous action, and then duplicate that action, and then change the name of the advanced action. And then all I need to do after I've changed the action name is change the shapes that I'm actually impacting here. So this is front 3, and then back 3, and then once again back 3 here. Update action, click on OK, and then close. And then of course I want to apply that advanced action to card number 3. So I use as button and then go to the actions panel, on success, execute advanced action, and this time it's flip 3 and hand cursor and disable click sound. So I've just done advanced action flip 4, and there are my settings there. So I'm going to close that down, and then of course selecting the card or the front of the card for card number 4, use as button, action, execute advanced action. Now I've got flip 4 in there as well, hand cursor, disable click sound. All I need to do is lasso these cards and align center and align middle, and do the same for the card number 3, so I can just start to tidy these up. Now there may be a temptation to actually group these together to line them up. If you do group them together, you will lose some of the functionality in your advanced action, so please don't group together. If you need to line things up, you'll need to do things individually. But let's test this out, and I know it's not quite aligned at the moment, but preview HTML5 in browser, and all of these cards should now flip So first, well, card 4, card 1, card 2, and card 3. Now the next thing we want to apply in this particular example is we want a button to appear once all the cards have been flipped, so the user can then continue, but only once the cards have been flipped. So what we're going to do here is we are going to insert a new shape, and the shape will be the button which allows users to continue on to the next screen. Let's put in a shape. So I'm just going to put my favorite in here, which is a star. Okay, so this is the star that will appear once the users have clicked on all 4 cards. What I'm going to do in this particular example is I'm going to go into state view. With the normal, there's no right or wrong way to do this. There are many ways. This is just an approach that we find works, and it might be a long way, it might be a short way. But what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go over to the right hand side. I'm going to add a state, and I'm going to call this one disabled state. I'm going to change the color to yellow, and I'm going to change the opacity to something that's quite light, so it looks like it's disabled. And what I can do here is I can just double click here and say disabled. And then of course, if I go to the normal view, I'm going to change this to a bright yellow. I'm going to type start, and I'm going to underline the S because that's going to be my shortcut key. Now, what's going to happen here is we want to set up this slide or this screen so when users enter the screen, that button is disabled, so it doesn't work. And what I'll do first of all is I'm going to turn this button on. So I'm going to turn the star on so it is a button. I'm going to use as button, and the action is just going to be go to next slide, hand cursor, and disable click sound. This star button is enabled as a button, but we don't want it to be enabled when people first enter the slide. We want it to be disabled. So what we do here is we set up an action to execute when we enter the slide. So if we go into the slide properties, so I've got nothing selected on the screen, and usually what I do is I'll click on the dark gray area around the outside, and where it says on enter, I'm going to say execute advanced action. Trap for young players, it will show the first script that's in there. We don't want to execute that script. In actual fact, we're going to create a brand new script. So I can click on the yellow folder button to the right to bring up the advanced actions window, and I'm going to click on the big black plus sign in the top right hand corner, create new action, and this one is going to say set up star button. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the state of that button to disabled. So the first thing we're going to do is hit the letter C on the keyboard in that first row of actions by double clicking on that first row. Bring up the menu, hit the letter C a couple of times. There you go. Change state of Smart Shape 9. I'm assuming that's it. I better name my star there. And I'm going to change the state to disabled. But what I also need to do is actually disable the star or disable the functionality of the button. And I can do that by double clicking on the second row underneath, and I hit the letter D, disable. And I'm looking for that shape, which is Smart Shape 9 at the moment. And now if I click on Save as Action, what's going to happen here is when users enter this slide, the shape will automatically change to the disabled state that I set up. It's also going to disable, so the button won't actually work. So let's close that out. Going back into the slide properties and selecting the script that I just created here, which is set up the star button. And last but not least, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this shape here, and I'm just going to call this star button. And fortunately, when you rename a shape that's been used in an advanced action, if we just go back into this script over here, and you'll see that the advanced action has updated with the proper shape name that I've just implemented there. Okay, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to insert a new slide, so just a blank slide here. which will demonstrate when I go on to the next slide. So I'm just going to put in a shape here that says next slide, just so we can see that that has actually moved on to the next slide. Let's have a look and see what happens when we preview this project. Not forgetting that the normal state of the start button says start, and it has enabled, because if I click on it, it says use as button, and it takes me to the next slide. But if I preview HTML5 in browser, and what we're going to notice here is that the star is now showing the disabled state that we created. And if I go to click on it, it actually doesn't work. How do we enable the star and change the state back to its normal state once all of the cards have been flipped? That's a really good question, and we achieve this using variables. So let's go and have a look. So what we need to do is we're going to create a variable that when it's clicked, it increments by 1. And this is going to be called the star variable. And the star variable is going to have an initial value of 0. So let's go in and have a look and see how we can create this variable. So if we go into the project menu and then variables, and I'm going to add a new variable here, and I'm going to call this var underscore star, and I'm going to give it an initial value of 0, and then I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to click on close. Whenever I'm using variables in a project, I like to keep a real-time eye on what the value of the variable is as we're working through the testing process. So what I tend to do here is I'm going to insert a shape, and I'm just going to pop it down in the bottom left hand corner here, and I'm going to call this var star variable equals, and then I'm going to insert the actual variable so we can see it changing in real time, so we can test to make sure that this is working correctly. So the way we do this, while the cursor is flashing inside the shape, I'm going to go and click over into the style properties panel, and just underneath the alignment buttons for the text, there are 3 little buttons here, and we're looking for a button called insert variable, and I'm looking for a user variable. So I'm clicking on the drop down menu. User variables are variables that we've created as the user of Captivate, or the developer, and then clicking on the drop down menu under variables, you'll see it says var star, and I click on OK. So when I go to preview this again, my expectation is that that variable that is inserted inside that shape should say 0. So let's have a quick look at this. So preview HTML5 in browser, and you'll see here the value of that variable is 0, because that's what we defined it as when we set up the variable in the first place. Now what we want to do is 2 things. As we click each shape, we're going to add 1 to the value of that variable. So say for example, if I click hard 4, it's going to add 1 to the variable. If I click shape 1, it's going to add another 1, so the value of that variable will become 2. If I click another shape, it's going to add 1, so the value of the variable will become 3. And then if I click another shape, it'll increment the value of the variable, and it will become 4. And then what we want to say is, as soon as the variable, or the value of that variable, equals 4, we're going to enable the start button. So this is how we can turn the start button on, by incrementing the value of that variable, and then each time we click one of the cards, we can check the value of that variable, and if the value of that variable equals 4, we're going to enable the start button. So let's have a look and see how this works. We're going to go back into the project menu, advanced actions, and we're going to look at going to the first advanced action called flip 1. And this is why we like to leave most of our actions inside of the advanced actions area, because it allows us to edit them quite easily. That was the case in this particular example when we were working with this client. We'd set up all this work, and then the client turned around and said, can you make it so this button actually is only enabled once all of the flip cards have been clicked on? What we're going to do here, under each of the advanced actions, as well as applying all of these effects, we're going to increment, and that's an action here, we're going to increment the star variable by 1. We can go to the last row in the first action, so we're going to double click on the the last row, hit the letter I for increment, and we're looking for the star, so I can just type in STA, there it is, star, increment by 1, and then update action. I'm going to go into flip 2. I'm going to increment by 1. Now, of course, if we knew this at the beginning, we could have done this with the first advanced action and then duplicated the advanced actions with this action as part of the action, but that's okay. We're looking for the star variable again. We're going to increment by 1, update action, go into flip 3, and then increment star VAR star by 1, update action, and then of course flip 4, increment VAR star by 1, and then update action. Click on OK. Let's preview this and see what's happening with the value of that variable. So preview HTML5 in browser, and now as we click on each of the cards, you'll now notice that the variable value is going up. And the variable happens after 1 second because that action appeared after that delay of 1 second. So that's why it's taking a second for that variable to update. And then, of course, it now equals 4. So once it equals 4, we then want to enable the star. So how do we do that? That's a really good question. We do need to go back into each of those flip card advanced actions. And in actual fact, what we need to do is we now need to go into the next decision up here. So I'm actually going to change the decision pages here. So where it says Untitled 1, I'm going to change this to animation. And then under Untitled 2, I'm going to change this to check star. And in actual fact, what we're doing here is we're going to say conditional tab, because we want to check if the value of the variable is 4. Under the first row here, we're going to say double click if variable VAR star is equal to, and we're going to say literal 4. I could put variable in there and set up another variable called proper value or something like that. That'll make it easier to update in case we wanted to add another card, but more on that later. So if the variable star is equal to 4, actually I might do that now. So let's go into variables, and I'm going to add a new variable, and I'm going to call this one VAR unlock star, and I'm going to put in 4, and I'm going to save that, close that. And what I can do here is I can go back here, change that to variable, and then I can actually VAT unlock star. Anyway, that should be VAR unlock star. So it's basically saying if VAR star is equal to unlock star, which is 4, then what we want to do is we want to change the state of the star button to normal, and we also want to enable the star button. So enable the star button and then update the action. This check star conditional action has been added to flip 1. So we can actually test this out now, and let's have a look and see what happens. So we're going to close this down. We're going to preview the HTML5 in browser. Okay, now in order for that if conditional advanced action to execute and equal 4, we need to click on card number 1 last. Okay, so I'm going to click on card number 3. The variable changes to 1. Click on card number 2. Changes to 2, click on card number 3, changes to 3, and then click on card number 4 and changes to 4. Now, here's a little bit of a trap, because what's happened here is the advanced action, if we go back and have a look at this advanced action, what has actually happened here is because it's taken 1 second for that variable to increment by 1, and this action has already played out before that delay next action, then it's missed out on catching that value. So what we need to do here is, why don't we increment the value of the variable right at the very beginning? Okay, so we're going to move that up. So what's going to happen here is the value of the variable will be incremented straight away, so it'll equal 4, and then everything else will play out, and by the time it gets to check on this part of the advanced action, that variable value will already be equal to 4. So because of the delay, it was actually missing out on catching that value. So this is where the order of these actions can really be critical. And of course, if we hadn't picked up on that, we could have been here for ages trying to figure out what was going on. So let's test this again. And this is why I like to test lots and lots and lots of times. Increment. And you'll see what happens here. All of these other actions, the variable changes value after a second. But as soon as we click this one, you'll see that the variable changed straight away and the start button became active. And now I can go to the next slide. Of course, what we need to do is we need to go back into our project advanced actions, and we essentially need to go into each of these other advanced actions. We need to change our increment line to increment the value of the variable first. And then of course, we need to go in and execute the conditional action. So I'm just going to do this again, and we go into if variable var star is equal to variable, and I called it VAT, didn't I? VAT unlock star. Then we want to enable the star button, and then we can change the state of the star button to normal. And you'll see that that was a slightly different order to what I did last time, but that's okay in this particular case. So if we update the action, because I've done it to flip 2, click on OK, and now if we preview this again, and make sure that I click one of the top 2 last. So I go to VAR 3, or card 3 I should say, card 4, we'll do card 1, and then as soon as that VAR star equals 4, and because it's getting incremented first, the very first thing it gets incremented, by the time it goes to read that other if condition, that VAR star value will equal 4, which means that the start button will now become enabled. Okay, now why did we change, or why did we create this variable VAR unlock star? It's because, say for example, we wanted to add another card in here or take a card away, then we only need to change this variable to 3 or 5 to equal the number of cards, because as we click on each card, it's going to increment by 1. So the total number of cards will equal the total value we want the variable to equal before it unlocks that star. Okay, now of course this is the final result that we ended up creating, of course. And if we just go in and look at one of these advanced actions for the pre-built one that we created, you'll see once again we've got the increment happening at the beginning. We've got a delay of half a second here, because in actual fact each of these durations was set to half a second. And then of course show star, the flip card count is equal to 4. I've just put in a literal value there, and then of course we've just enabled the state and changed the state of the star, which allows us to then move on to the next screen. Now there are plenty of ways that we can add variety to this particular activity. For example, we could have a situation where if they clicked on one card, we could disable all of the other cards. So it could be like a guessing game or something like that. So there are plenty of opportunities to provide some variety and different types of outputs and different types of experiences based on what's happening. But we really hope you've enjoyed this demonstration to see how we've used flip cards, and we do hope you managed to get some value out of this. And if you've come up with some cool ways to use flip cards in your projects, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to put in the comments below, or you can contact us via our channel. And happy flip carding. Bye for now.